The smell I remember most is cedar. Not the furniture kind, real cedar, like the inside of an old chest that hadn't been opened in years. It hit me the moment I stepped into my father's house the afternoon he died, and I stood in the doorway for a full minute before I could make myself go inside. My father was a Green Beret, 22 years. He never talked about it, not once. Not a single story over dinner, not a single name dropped in casual conversation. Growing up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, knew the sound of helicopters in the mornings, knew what a deployment meant in practical terms: an empty chair, a quieter house, a mother who slept light. But I didn't know what he actually did. I still don't. Not all of it. He retired when I was 17. After that, he fixed things. Neighbors' fences, church gutters, a leaking roof 2 streets over. He never charged anyone. He drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it and made his own coffee at home because he said the coffee shops charged too much. He owned one sport coat. He wore it to funerals and graduations and nothing else. When he died, cardiac event they called it, which is a clinical way of saying his heart simply stopped on a Wednesday morning while he was reading the paper. I was 29 and living in Atlanta. At 7:42 a.m., it was his neighbor, a retired postal worker named Ed, who had kept a quiet watch on my father for years without either of them ever formally agreeing to it. Ed said he'd seen the newspaper still on the porch at noon and used his emergency key. I don't remember driving to the airport. I remember being in the seat. I remember landing. The funeral was small. My father had no surviving siblings. My mother had passed 6 years earlier. There were a handful of people I didn't recognize, veterans, I assumed, from the way they stood and the way they didn't speak much. My older brother, Seth, arrived 20 minutes late and spent most of the graveside service on his phone with his hand half covering the screen like I wouldn't notice. The burial was at Salisbury National Cemetery. The chaplain was young and kind and read from a card because he hadn't known my father. The rifle volley was sharp and clean. A soldier folded the flag in precise triangles and handed it to me, not Seth, because I had RSVP'd to the funeral coordinator and Seth hadn't. I was still holding the flag when the man approached me. He was in his mid-70s, silver-haired, straight posture, dark suit. He didn't look like anyone I recognized. He walked across the grass with the deliberate pace of someone who never moved faster than he needed to. He waited until the last of the other mourners had drifted to their cars before he came within speaking distance. He said my father's name the way people say it when they knew someone, not reading it off a program. I served with him, he said. Early days. I thanked him for coming. I didn't know what else to say. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. It was plain white, no logo, no title. A phone number with a country code I didn't recognize, and a single name written in blue ink, Lundquist. Call that number, he said. Tell them who your father was. They'll know what to do. He shook my hand once, nodded, and walked back toward the parking area. I watched him go until he turned a corner between 2 rows of white markers and disappeared. I looked down at the card. I had no idea what country code +47 was. I looked it up in the car before I started the engine. Norway. Seth knocked on the window of my rental before I could think too long about it. He climbed into the passenger seat without being invited. So, he said, we need to talk about the house. It's been 2 hours, I told him. He made a face that meant he thought I was being emotional. Seth made that face a lot. He was 41 and had the energy of someone perpetually waiting for a situation to become financially advantageous. He had borrowed money from our father twice that I knew of, probably more that I didn't. There's not going to be much, he said. You know how he lived. I know, I said. I just want to make sure we handle it clean. That word, clean. Like grief was a transaction to be settled. I drove back to the house alone that evening. Seth was staying at a hotel 20 minutes away, which was fine with me. The cedar smell was strongest in the back bedroom. My father's bed was made with military corners. His boots were by the door. On the nightstand, a library book with a receipt marking his page, a glass of water he'd never finished, a small alarm clock still ticking. He had almost nothing on the walls. One framed photograph in the hallway, him and Mother at what looked like a state park somewhere, both squinting, no shadow boxes. Nothing that announced who he had been. I went through his desk that night, tax returns filed in labeled folders going back 15 years, a manila envelope with the deed to the house, auto insurance, medical paperwork, a handwritten note that turned out to be his grocery list from the week before he died, coffee, bread batteries, chicken thighs. It's in the bottom drawer tucked beneath the road atlas from 2009. I found his passport. It had been renewed. The current one was issued 7 years ago. The one before it was paperclipped to the back. I sat down on the floor and went through it slowly. Oslo 3 times. Bergen. Stockholm once. Reykjavik. Dates spanning the better part of a decade. The most recent stamp was 14 months ago. My father, who owned one sport coat and made his coffee at home, had been to Scandinavia 6 times in 10 years. I held the card up against the light like would tell me something. Seth called while I was sitting there. "Did you look through everything?" he asked. "I'm still going through things," I said. "Is there anything, like financial accounts, investment stuff?" "I don't know yet, because I talked to a probate attorney," he said, just in general terms. "He said if there are accounts that weren't disclosed, Seth. I'm just saying, you're down there alone and I want to make sure we're doing this right. I'll tell you what I find," I said. And I hung up. I called the Norwegian number the next morning, standing in the kitchen with his old coffee maker gurgling beside me. The woman who answered spoke English without an accent I could place, precise and calm. I gave her my father's name. There was a pause, the kind that means something. "Yes," she said, "we've been expecting this call. I'm very sorry for your loss." My stomach went still. She said someone would meet me if I could travel. She said to bring identification and a death certificate. She said to ask for the Voss office when I arrived. No mention of what the office was, no mention of why. I hung up. I walked through the house again, more slowly this time. I looked at things I had walked past the night before. A small locked cabinet mounted inside the garage, the kind that usually holds power tools. A fire safe in the closet I had assumed was empty. The way his desk was organized. Everything labeled, nothing left to chance. My father had lived simply, he had not lived carelessly. I booked a flight to Oslo that afternoon. I didn't tell Seth. I told him I had a meeting with the estate attorney and would be out of pocket for a few days. That was enough. Seth operated on timelines that suited him, and as long as he thought the process was moving, he wouldn't push too hard. He showed up at the house the next morning before I left for the airport. He let himself in with the key he had taken from under the mat, which my father had kept there for 30 years. He stood in the living room looking at things in a way that reminded me of someone estimating square footage. "It's smaller than I remembered," he said. "It's the same size," I said. He ran a hand over the back of the couch. "Dad should have updated some of this stuff. Would have helped the resale. He's been dead for 4 days, Seth." He gave me a long look. "You've always been dramatic." I didn't answer. He sat down at the kitchen table, which was where my father did his crossword puzzles on Sunday mornings. Seth leaned back in the chair like he owned it. "I just don't want you making decisions without me in the loop." "It's his estate," I said. "There's a process. And you're handling the process alone?" "I'm the executor," I said. "It's in the will." He didn't know that. I watched it register. He was quiet for a moment. Then did he leave much? I don't know yet. He exhaled through his nose. "You know he loaned me money." "I know. Twice." "I know that too." "He said it wasn't a big deal," Seth said. "Said it was family." "It was family," I agreed. He shifted in the chair. "Easy for you to say. You always had it together." "Maybe I did. I had a stable job, a 401k I actually contributed to, a lease I paid on time. I didn't open restaurants that closed in 8 months or buy rental properties I couldn't afford to maintain." Seth had done both. Dad had helped him both times. Quietly. "Without conditions," I said. "He respected you," Seth replied. "There's a difference. I thought about that for a long time after he left." The flight to Oslo was 9 hours. I sat in a window seat and watched the Atlantic go dark below me and tried to think about what I was flying toward. I didn't have a theory. My father had been a private person in ways I'd accepted without examining. Now I was being asked to examine it all at once in a foreign country, with a name on a card and no other instructions. He had never mentioned Norway, not once. Oslo was clean and quiet when I landed. The airport was efficient and calm. The cab driver spoke excellent English and didn't feel the need to fill the silence, which I appreciated. The city looked serious from the taxi window. Stone buildings, gray sky, the smell of rain on pavement. The address I'd been given was in a neighborhood near the water. Not a bank, exactly. More like an investment management office, the kind with no signage out front, just a number on the door and a buzzer. The woman who opened it was young, professional, and clearly expecting me. She led me down a hallway lined with closed doors and brought me into a small conference room with a window overlooking a courtyard. Someone had put a glass of water on the table. A man came in a few minutes later. 60, maybe. Quiet demeanor. He introduced himself as a senior account manager and expressed condolences in a way that sounded practiced but genuine. "Your father was a careful man," he said. That word. Careful. Not disciplined, not controlled. Careful, like someone who had considered every step before taking it. He opened a folder. I stared at the first page for a long time before the numbers made sense. "This isn't right," I said. "My father lived in a 3-bedroom house in Fayetteville." The account manager nodded. He was a deliberate investor, conservative, long-term. He never withdrew funds for personal use. "He drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it," I said. The man looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Yes," he said. That was his choice. The trust had been established 18 years ago. It was currently valued at just over $9 million. He had structured it carefully, accounts distributed, growths, no exposure to volatile markets. The kind of portfolio someone builds over decades if they care more about what it does than what it looks like. "What is it for?" I asked. The account manager folded his hands. "Your father designated the trust for a specific purpose. Support for former Special Forces personnel and their immediate families. Medical costs not covered by VA benefits, housing assistance in cases of financial hardship." I sat back in my chair. "He never said anything," I said. "He was explicit about that," the man replied. "He didn't want the existence of the trust to influence relationships while he was alive." "And me?" I asked. "You are the successor trustee." His words in the documentation were specific. "Not dissolve it." There was a sealed envelope on the table. The account manager slid it toward me. "He left this," the man said, "to be delivered only after his death." My phone buzzed in my bag. "Seth." I let it ring. I looked at the envelope for a long moment before I opened it. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored. My father's handwriting was the same as it had always been. Small, even, printed in capital letters like everything he wrote, was a form that needed to be legible. If you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to explain it myself. I had to stop there. I looked out the window at the courtyard. A pigeon was walking along the edge of a wall. I watched it for a few seconds before I kept reading. "I didn't hide this from you because I didn't trust you. I hid it from you because I've seen what money does to people before they're ready for it. You needed to build your own life without a net under you. That was intentional. You did it. I'm proud of that. After I retired, I stayed in contact with the men I served with. Not reunions, just calls. Some of them came home and built good lives. Some of them didn't. The VA does what it can. It's never been enough. I had the means to help, and I didn't need recognition for it. You don't advertise that kind of thing. You just do it. The trust has its own oversight structure. There are lawyers who know what they're doing. But I needed a person at the center of it who understood why it exists. Someone who would say no to the wrong things. I think that's you. Do what you think is right. That's always been enough." There was no signature. He never signed his notes. We always just knew who they were from. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time. "Seth," I said. "What did the attorney say?" he asked immediately. I looked at the number on the page in front of me. "There's something here," I said slowly. "But it's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Is there money? There's a trust." He inhaled sharply. "How much?" I told him. The silence that followed lasted a long time. "Jesus," he said finally. $9 million. And he lived like that. He made a choice, I said. A choice. Seth's voice went flat. He chose to live in that house and drive that truck, and not once did he offer to help me get out of debt. But there's $9 million in Norway. He did help you, I said. More than once. That's different. That was loans. This is a trust, I said. with the structure and beneficiaries. It's not a bank account waiting to be divided, so I get nothing. That's not what I said. He was quiet again. When he spoke, there was something underneath the anger, old and tired. You're going to protect it, he said. Aren't you? I'm going to do what he asked me to do. He hung up without responding. I sat in the conference room for another 20 minutes after the call ended. The account manager returned with a second folder of documentation, summaries of disbursements made over the years, anonymized but specific. A daughter's college tuition after her father came home from deployment with a TBI, a mortgage current on a widow's house in Tennessee, surgeries, therapy, rent deposits. Small amounts handled quietly without ceremony. My father had not wasted a single dollar of it. He had not spent a single dollar of it on himself. The account manager walked me through the succession documents before I left. There were protocols, Swiss attorneys, a compliance board, quarterly reporting requirements. None of it was overwhelming. All of it was exactly what I would have expected from my father. As I stepped outside into the Oslo air, the sky had cleared slightly. The water was visible at the end of the street, flat and silver. I didn't feel wealthy. I felt like I'd been handed something heavy and asked to carry it straight. Seth didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after I returned. I went back to Fayetteville. I finished going through my father's house. I found the locked garage cabinet. It held tools, as I'd guessed, but also a small fireproof box with 2 additional documents inside. One was a letter of intent supporting the trust. The other was a handwritten list of names, 26 of them. No explanation, no context. Just names written in that same small, even print. I brought the list to the estate attorney in Fayetteville, a woman named Paula, who had handled my father's will and seemed unsurprised by everything I told her. He came to me about 8 years ago, she said. He was very clear about what he wanted and very clear that he didn't want it discussed. Everyone had been waiting for a call I didn't know was coming. Paula connected me with an American attorney who specialized in international estate structures. He reviewed everything and told me the trust was clean, valid under both Norwegian and U.S. law. No exposure, no ambiguity. Your father, he said, was unusually thorough. Seth filed a formal challenge 4 weeks later. I wasn't surprised. He alleged that the trust represented assets that should have been disclosed in the will and argued that as a surviving heir he was entitled to equitable distribution. His attorney was aggressive on paper and calmer in person. The hearing was in a county courthouse in Fayetteville with beige walls and humming fluorescent lights. No drama. Seth sat at one table, I sat at another. We didn't look at each other. Paula presented the documentation. The trust had been established 18 years before my father's death. It was referenced by existence in the will. It was not a hidden asset. It was a separately structured legal entity with its own governance. Seth's attorney pushed on the disclosure angle. Paula pushed back. And then the man from the cemetery walked in and took a seat behind us. I hadn't seen him since Salisbury. He looked the same, silver hair, straight posture. He had agreed, through Paula, to appear as a character witness. When he was called, he stood and spoke quietly, no theatrics. He confirmed that my father had discussed the trust's purpose with him during the early stages of establishing it, that no third party had pressured or influenced my father's decisions, and that the structure reflected my father's stated values and intentions over many years. Seth's attorney asked if he had influenced my father. He had a quiet way of answering questions that made them feel resolved before the follow-up could form. Your father influenced himself, he said. That judge recessed and returned with a ruling within the hour. The trust is valid, she said. The petition is dismissed. Seth didn't speak to me on the courthouse steps. He stood beside his car looking at the sidewalk for a long moment. Then he said, without looking moved, "No," I said. He got in his car. He called 3 weeks later, not about money, or not only about money. He called at 8 in the evening, and he sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the time. I talked to someone, he said, a financial counselor. Through work. I waited. She said I've been using debt as he paused, a way to stay in motion, like if I'm always in crisis, I don't have to make real decisions. I didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would help. I think Dad knew that, Seth said. He knew I wasn't ready. He helped you when you needed it, I said. He helped me not drown. There's a difference between that and, he exhaled, and trusting me with something. I drove to Greensboro to see him the following Saturday. His apartment had dishes in the sink and mail on the counter that he hadn't opened. We sat at his kitchen table, and I walked him through the trust documents the way the account manager in Oslo had walked me through them. Not because he had any legal standing in it now, because he was my brother, and he deserved to understand what our father had built. He was quiet through most of it. He asked a few questions, practical ones. At the end, he said, he really never took any of it for himself. Not a cent. Seth shook his head slowly. I called him tight. I actually used that word. To his face. I didn't respond. He stared at the table. He wasn't tight, Seth said. He just didn't need it. We sat there for a while in the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like silence. It feels like something settling. There is a provision in the trust for family stabilization. My father included it with specific conditions. Documented financial counseling, structured disbursements tied to measurable benchmarks, no lump sums. He had written the clause in language that was almost gentle. For a legal document, the intent was not to punish, it read. The intent is to support without enabling. I offered it to Seth. He said he needed to think about it. He called back 4 days later and said yes. A year passed. The trust continued its work, quietly, the way it always had. Medical bills, school tuition, a veteran in eastern Tennessee who needed a hearing aid and couldn't cover the VA copay, a widow in Colorado whose car needed repairs she couldn't afford because her husband's pension had gaps. My father had thought about all of them, specifically, by name, in some cases. He had sat in that house in Fayetteville with his grocery lists and his library books and his 200,000-mile truck, and he had quietly built something that outlasted him. Seth and I drove to Salisbury on a Sunday in early spring, no particular occasion. It just felt like the right time. The cemetery was quiet. The grass was wet from the night before. We found the headstone without needing to check a map. I had memorized where it was without meaning to. We stood there for a while without talking. Seth had gotten his debt below 40% of what it was. He'd stopped opening credit lines he didn't need. He called me more than he used to. Not about money, just to talk. It was a strange adjustment, and I was grateful for it. I thought he had nothing, Seth said. He had everything he needed, I said. He looked at the headstone, and everything he didn't need went somewhere else. That's exactly right. The wind moved through the row of trees along the cemetery's edge, a few early birds, the sound of a groundskeeper somewhere in the distance. I'm sorry, he said. For the lawsuit. For the things I said. I know. He looked at me. You're not going to tell me it's fine. It was hard, I said, but I get it. He nodded. Good, because I don't want you to lie to me. I wouldn't. We stood a while longer. There was nothing more that needed to be said, which meant we had said enough. On the drive back, I thought about the first time I opened my father's letter in that conference room in Oslo's, how my hands had been steadier than I expected, how I had read it twice before I trusted myself to put it down. He had spent 32 years of his life doing things he would never explain, protecting people he would never name, building something he would never announce, no medals on the wall, no stories over dinner, no truck that anyone would notice in a parking lot, just steady, just the work. There are people I have never met whose lives are better, because my father existed. He never needed them to know his name. He never needed me to know either until it was time. I understand it now, not all of it. That's what he left me. Not a number on a page, a way of doing things. If you have someone in your life who lives quietly, who shows up without announcement and builds without credit, look closer. That kind of person is rare, and they're worth knowing before it's too late to ask them anything at all.